Comics, and Games. What is going on, my friend?
Hey, Jimmy, thank you so much for having me on the show.
Oh man, excited to talk to you. We were kind of talking before we, hit record here, and I was telling you that I was kind of new to your channel, and but I started watching your channel, and I was like, dude, I got to have this guy on 10 questions. I think this will be fun. So let's just jump straight into it here. Question one is always the same, and it's what got you into comics?
Hmm. Yeah, I guess I might have a similar backstory with my comic book collecting, in so much as I started collecting comics when I was a kid, and so I think if I really trace it back, it probably I was of that generation that kind of came off the heels of like the Tim Burton Batman craze. So like I think I would have probably seen the movie with my dad and my brother. And then my dad, probably would have been like, hey, let's take the kids to like a comic book store and kind of go on that, adventure. So I think it was around like 89 or 90 when I first set foot into a comic book store. And that kind of became like, at least that summer or the next few years kind of became the ritual that my brother and my dad and I, we'd go to the comic book store and collect comic books. And, kind of like other people, there's times in your life where you're more into it as you get older and you get, fall out of it for a bit, get back into it for a bit, et cetera, et cetera. And I'd say like since around 2017 was when I like really got back into it hard as, an adult, and basically been collecting since.
Cool, man. So did he collect books, or did he just kind of dig the Batman movie too?
Yeah, he didn't collect any books. Like, unfortunately, he didn't have that like stash of comics that is like, like a treasure trove of Silver Age stuff. But
Right.
I do know that I think he probably would have maybe bought a couple comics when he was a kid. Like, at least that was what he would say to me, is be like, oh yeah, like I read Green Lantern growing up, and I would read like Incredible Hulk growing up and things like that. But he didn't have a collection, or he didn't still have it. So really it was that, when we saw Batman and went to the comic book store after that, that was probably when all of us together started collecting again.
See, that's cool, because that's one of the things I like about the hobby, right? Is, my journey came through my uncle, and he sold at flea markets. I've told this story on here 1,000 times, but it's, he sold at flea markets. I used to go hang out with him, and I was allowed to read anything he had. And he was selling ball cards and comic books and, all this other stuff. And my dad could give a flip about a comic book or a superhero.
Right.
But I liked it. So he would take me anywhere I wanted to go. Like if I wanted to go hang out with my uncle, or if I wanted to go watch a movie, he would take me. And just kind of foster that. And it's one of those things that, as a father-son, because my dad and I were really different people, had different interests, like he was a coal miner, mechanic type guy. If I touched your car, it would fall apart. Right. So,
right.
So I'm one of those guys. But it was something that we could bond over. And, and he didn't care at all about it, but he would go with me. And so I think that's cool, right? That you went and saw Batman, which was one of the most, to me, that's Batman, right? The 89, Tim Burton, Michael Keaton, the whole thing, that's Batman. And that you guys actually, it was a way to bond.
Yeah. It really did become like a way for all of us to bond. And to your points, that's what's so cool to me about the collecting, is like, we all are in this community, and we all just really just appreciate all the characters and stuff that we read and grew up on. And that's really what it's all about. It's just being able to have the community and share the books that you like with each other.
Absolutely. Did you ever collect any like trading cards or anything like that? Were you ever into that?
Yeah, I was into that a little bit. I mean, like, so I had the Marvel cards too, as well, growing up. I think it's interesting. I think because I was like 6, 7 when I really first started. So I think when you're that age, the reading, I would like flip through the pictures, and I was probably not doing much reading, but the trading cards, I just think like all the kids like that stuff. So I was into the cards, and then I had some sports cards too, but that wasn't as sticky to me as a hobby.
So you said, you kind of left, came back in 17. What brought you back to the hobby?
I think, I would say that actually, if I really try to think about why I got back into the hobby, like I fell out for a while, got back into it in college. And my interest in collecting is almost like in how the industry had moved. So like, maybe I got out of it in like 95 or 6. And then, those years up until like 2005, Mark Millar, Civil War, like that's when it got my attention again. And then like I would actually was reading a lot of the trades and sporadically out throughout the years. And then I think just like, with the MCU and just watching all the movies and consuming that stuff, that really like made me want to, pull out my old, short boxes and long boxes and flip through the comics. And I think that's probably what really sparked it. Is just somewhere at that point, I was just, thinking, being nostalgic towards my comics.
Absolutely. No, that nostalgia is a lot of the drive for me. I like to go back and get things when I was a kid, that I remember. Right. So, I think that's the fun. My wife calls me a 46-year-old child all the time.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So now, do you read a lot? I mean, do you read a lot of comic books, or do you read modern stuff? I guess like New Comic Book Day.
I do. And I mean, I'm sure we'll get into like the videos and stuff that I do on the channel, or if people are not familiar, what I tend to do on the channel is talk a little more on that like financial collecting side of things or speculative type of things. And I don't talk too much about current comic books, at least on the channel. But I do tend to read a lot of the current stuff. I'm not like, a super avid buyer of the new stuff, but if there's a series that gets my interest, I'll definitely pick it up. Or if there's, a lot of stuff on like the digital comic stuff, like the Marvel Unlimited apps, like I have a subscription that I read some series that I'm not really willing to buy, but I will definitely still be interested in reading them. Yeah.
Sure. No, absolutely. No, I know as far as like, I'm a New Comic Book Day junkie, right? Like I love it, but do you consume, so you definitely do digital. Do you do trades or do floppies from time to time, or is it pretty much you're just kind of limited? You limit yourself to the digital side.
Yeah, I do floppies. So like, at the time of recording this, like I'm collecting, what have I been picking up? Like I've been picking up the new Kate's Incredible Hulk stuff, and I've been, unironically, Darkhawk is one of my favorite characters. Maybe that's a preview into a question later, but like I actually am reading this new Kyle Higgins Darkhawk run. And appreciating that. So I'll pick up floppies and things like that do interest me. And then the trade paperbacks, like I have a few of those, but I think the digital Marvel Unlimited apps and stuff has sort of replaced my reading of trades, even though I do like the tactile feel of reading it more. It's just that, you only have so much shelf space to collect those trades.
No, and it's actually kind of nice too, right? Because if you're like, I'm on the road a lot with work, and so I don't want to necessarily drag my books with me.
Right.
So it's nice. I'll have my iPad or my computer there, and I can be anywhere and I can read a book, if I want to. So the digital, I was like anti-digital, right? Like I'm that age where I had one foot in the old school way of things and one foot in the new school way of things. And I was like anti-digital. I said, I have to have the paper in my hand. But recently I've become more of a digital reader. More so than anything, and it really is a different perspective, like the way the colors pop, because a lot of the art's done that way now. A lot of it pops that way.
It really is something that like, you kind of have to sort of get used to, especially if you're coming from like, having the actual physical comics and stuff. And to this day, I do actually like reading the trades more. And because like, I'm still around your age in the sense that like, we're kind of in between the generations where I still like grew up holding physical copies. So I still like that. But I mean, to your point, it's like, it's just more convenient, when you're on the road. So it's just really that you can't beat that part of it.
No, absolutely. All right. So let's move on to question 2. And I'm always interested in what brings somebody to YouTube to start creating content. So like what brought you to this space to, start putting out the stuff you do?
Well, I guess, so I live in the Southern California area, and what I do in my real work life is I work in film and television, things like that. And I was always interested in like the YouTube space. Like I was always kind of curious of like, hey, that'd be kind of cool to do a YouTube thing. And then when COVID hit, like most industries, a lot of industries kind of shut down or people had to work from home. But, in film in particular, like, that one really shut down. So I kind of had, a lot of extra time on my hands, and I was like, all right, well, what am I going to do with myself? And at that time I was even thinking like, oh, maybe I'll do like a film YouTube channel or like an educational film YouTube channel. That was what I was thinking I was going to do. And I didn't want to mix my work life with the YouTube like hobby thing. So I decided, let me try this comic book thing, or let me do something that's a little more fun. I could just talk about something I like. And so that was kind of how it started. And then, like you would know, at a certain point, it takes that sort of leap of faith or that little bit of courage to just throw yourself out there and presume that there's going to be people who want to listen to what you have to say about things. But, you know, I just decided like, hey, I'm just going to do it. And as long as it's kind of fun to keep making videos, that'll be what it is. So that was really kind of what started the channel. Well,
that's cool. Yeah, no, and I have to know, what is Swagglehaus?
Yeah. So Swagglehoss originally is like my gamer name. So I don't know if you're a video game player, but like, you know, if there's video game players out there, like, you know, having your gamer name is always going to be a thing, right? So Swagglehoss was my kind of gamer name, and the impetus behind that is that so I mentioned that I work in film, and I had actually directed a lot of music videos at the start of my career, and one of the artists whose music video I did one for was an artist named by the name Soulja Boy. And I don't know if you know who Soulja Boy is.
I have daughters. Yeah, I know exactly who that is.
All right. So Soulja Boy, and he had a song called Pretty Boy Swag. And in the making of the video, we were, you know, hanging out and we are just chatting it up. And he goes, and he says to me, Mickey, he's like, yeah, man, Mickey, like, you got swag, man, but you got kind of like a nerdy swag, man. And so that was kind of his way of saying that, you know, he thought I had swag, but like in this very specific type of way. And then sort of Swaggle kind of more from that. It became my like nerd version of swag. And then Hoss is like house. So like in theory, the name is the House of Nerd Swag. That's what it means to me.
I love it.
Yeah.
Now, and like your logo is kind of like the ninja, right? Like am I right? And a ninja. Yeah. So like, what's that? Talk about that.
That's a good question. That the logo doesn't have as fun of a story. That's one of those like, all right, so I have a YouTube channel now, and I should probably come up with a logo. Let me go to some logo maker. I don't know. This ninja looks kind of cool. Let me just click that, and then that's really what it became. So it just became the ninja thing, and then, you know, flash forward months later, and I'm trying to like kind of just update my logo. And I'm like, well, the ninja kind of has stuck, so I'm just going to stick with that. That's really it, the story.
Like I really, and I love that. I love that because I was sitting there, right, trying to come up with these questions for you. And I'm thinking, well, you know, that name and then a ninja, like how do those tie together? Not at all.
Not at all. Not at all. So, but in truth, like, you know, maybe one day in the future when I do a nicer logo, you know, the ninja might find like we might move on from the ninja unless the people out there are like, no, you got to keep the ninja. So
I think you need to keep the ninja. I love it. I mean, I don't know. Like I said, I love it. And I mean, and it definitely, you know, it's you. When you see the ninja, you know it's you, right? So
right.
I dig it. I don't know. I think you should keep it. All right. So question 3, and I have to, because you spoke a little bit about it, so I have to ask, and you can talk about it as much as you want to. But, you know, you've already said that you directed a music video for Soulja Boy. You're in film and TV. Do you care to kind of expand on that a little bit and talk about what you do? I mean, do you direct or produce or all the above?
Yeah. I write and direct. I do a lot of like music videos and commercials and things like that. And I do a lot of screenwriting as well. That I work for. Currently now I work for a lot of video game companies doing scripting for like their narratives. And I've done a lot of work for cinematics and things like that. So that's been kind of like what's been fueling the my workload recently. But yeah, you know, I work in film and TV, and I've had screenplays optioned before, and I'm on some film YouTube channels, you know, out there in the world, which is actually really funny because I've done some interviews, and then in the comments I did notice that it's like, hey, it's Swagglehoss, you know. So my comic book persona is become larger than my work life persona.
Well, that's cool. I mean, any other, like, other than Soulja Boy, any other notable people we might know that you've directed music videos for?
Sure. Yeah. I've done stuff for like LMFAO, if you know who they are. I've done CeeLo Green and Katy Perry and Tyga and Little John, artists like that. So
stop. Katy Perry, I love her.
Yeah.
For so obvious reasons.
Yeah. I mean, well, she's definitely, you know, super hard worker, and she's great, and she's, you know, super talented. So it was definitely awesome to get the chance to do some of those videos from back in the day.
Well, that is very cool, man. That's awesome. And as far as like TV, I mean, is it mainly like commercials and music videos, or do you do anything for like TV?
Not currently. I mean, I'm, you know, I have aspirations and goals and things like
Sure.
that I'm still sort of pushing towards and working towards for sure. So yeah, absolutely. I'm always doing pitches for, screenplays and things like that. So yeah, the goal would maybe one day, maybe one day I will be directing a Moon Knight Disney Plus show. That would be one day my ultimate goal type of thing.
That's awesome, man. So really, like as far as the business is concerned, like how long have you been in that business?
So I've been doing it for, let me think, what's it, 2022? So yeah, I've really been doing it for about 14 years now. Like it's been kind of like it's been my career essentially. So that's kind of really what I've been grinding at and working towards.
Cool. So like how does one, like, you hear all these stories about people, going to Hollywood to try to make it. Like, is that something like when you were growing up, you're like, hey, I want to do this. This is what I would like to actually do. Or is it something that you kind of fell into and developed a love for? Like, I mean, kind of explain that. I know it's maybe a dumb question, but
no, yeah. It was like, so we're at that impressionable age of like, watching Batman, when I was a kid. I think it was like probably watching like Jurassic Park, like, every movie that was influential between like 89 and 92 that made me like fall in love with movies. So I always like really, really loved going to movies and was obsessed with it. And then I think like a lot of, aspiring filmmaker people or kids do, they find their parents' video camera and then you end up like doing a bunch of skits, in middle school and high school. And so I was that person that was always like filming little shorts and stuff with my parents' camera. And it was something that like, yeah, I knew that I loved the craft and wanted to pursue that in some kind of way. So like for me, in my particular story, it was like, yeah, like I just really loved, filmmaking and I knew that it was something that I wanted to pursue.
Did you go to like film school or anything?
Yeah. So I'm in the Los Angeles area. I went to USC actually was my alma mater. Yeah.
Cool.
So
cool.
They have a pretty good film school, notable film school.
Well, very cool, man. That's awesome. All right, I'll leave you alone about that. When you said that, and I was like, wait a minute, hold on, I have to ask.
Yeah, no.
No, so that's cool, man. I absolutely love that. So let's kind of kick it over here. I want to talk a little more about your YouTube channel. And this is a little different than what I normally do on 10 Questions, but where I was fairly new to your channel and I started kind of going through and watching these different videos, and I thought it would be fun to just kind of touch some of these topics because A, it's going to let people know what kind of content you're doing, but also B, I think it would be incredibly informative, just to kind of talk it out. So let's make this question 4. And one of the videos is titled Comic Book Buying Strategy. And I wanted you to talk about like, what is your comic book buying strategy?
Well, I have a couple different ones, I guess, as far as like, what my strategy is. I mean, for me, it's like, well, let me put it like this, when I collect comic books, obviously the golden rule is always like, buy what you love, right? Like that's always the golden rule. And for the most part, that is what I always collect. But comic books are really, really expensive. They can be, very, very pricey. So, I'm like a big proponent of having the hobby pay for itself in some kind of way, trying to find ways to like, find equity in certain comic books that you can maybe sell or trade into the one that you actually really want. So, so from time to time I will, do videos that are like, strategy videos or things like that just kind of really, it's just me sharing my experience of what I'm thinking of doing and trying to distill that down into like some video that maybe someone finds helpful. So one video I had that I called it like my comic buying golden rule. And, it's not like super sagely, oh no, you've never heard this before. But like one thing that I would say is like, hey, like if I'm out in the wild, like I'm never going to buy a comic book that is being sold for more than what is being sold for on eBay. Sure. And I kind of go into like why that is and like how it's like important to, if you can buy a comic book that you can at least like return into the market or sell for a higher price, that's going to be a helpful strategy for you to, allow your collection to pay for itself by trading,
Absolutely. So one of the things I kind of wanted to expound on this just a little bit and talk about, because I know what it was like when I got back into the hobby, right? I had no strategy.
Right.
Like I was buying everything. I mean, whatever it was, like I jumped in about the time that Rebirth happened. You know, when Rebirth started, it had just come out. Like that was
Right.
the first book I bought, was that one shot, because I'm more of a DC fan more so than anything. So my strategy, I eventually developed a strategy because, as everybody knows, it's insanely expensive, and you can literally drop $150 a week on New Comic Book Day if you're not careful.
Totally.
You know, with all the new books and the variants and all the different things. And I was buying cover A through Z, and I was doing all these crazy things. And then as I went, I feel like I went through a progression that a lot of people go through. And I just wanted to kind of get your thoughts on this, where, you know, I got back in the hobby, I was buying everything. And I was like, okay, this is too expensive. I can't do all this. I'm basically just throwing these boxes in a short box and, you know, not really reading them. Then I started, you know, really going to, all right, what do I love? Right? Like, what do I really like? And then I started kind of looking into the spec market a bit and saying, okay, is there something that's reasonably hot that maybe I could pick up and sell, that I don't necessarily care about my collection, but I could resell? Then I still do that, but then I ventured into wanting to buy more keys and buying, you know, older books, Silver Age, Bronze Age, even some Golden Age. Do you think most collectors go through that at some point as they kind of get into the hobby?
Yeah, I mean, certainly the way that you kind of broke down your progression was very similar to mine. Like when I mentioned, like really got back into collecting in 2017, I had a very similar progression to like what you kind of laid out. And I think, I think that that's like probably, to your point, is like, is something that a lot of collectors not only eventually do, but it's actually probably how you should eventually consume the hobby in a sense, because, you know, when you're getting back into comics or you're getting into it for the first time, you know, the strategy should be like, hey, you know, just walk in a comic store and look around and see what looks interesting to you and just grab it off the shelf and read it, you know, and just allow the hobby to come to you in that sense. But you know, like what you were saying, if it's something that you're going to do for a while, there's going to be a certain point where you start to realize like, okay, like, you know, reading books week to week starts to get really, really expensive. Like, is there ways that I can kind of mitigate, you know, some of the cost of things? And okay, maybe I should look into a little bit of a spec thing. Oh, okay, like this book is, you know, kind of hot in the market, and I can buy a cover A and a 2, and maybe I can sell the 2, you know, or the cover B, and that pays for the A, and, you know, so those types of things. And I think that is you know, I think it's a really helpful way for a lot of people to collect, and actually I think it can eventually become, you know, depending on how you frame for yourself, a really fun way to participate in the hobby. You know, for me, it's like I'm trading comics, and yeah, I'm selling them, but really I'm just taking that money to buy the things that I actually want. So this idea of trading comics is really, really a fun part of the way that at least my collecting has been.
No, I agree. I mean, you know, and then looking at all these different sources of places that you can buy, you don't have to just buy off eBay. You can find other collectors who have something you want, and maybe you have something they want, and then you trade, right. And it's the whole barter system. Like I dig it, you know, and
yeah,
but it really haven't. And I think that the way that I collect still changes today. You know, though I was interviewing a guy, he's a friend of mine, a guy that I met, you know, on YouTube, and we call it comic book ADD, where, you know, you've got 20 different things going on, and it's sometimes hard to focus, and you don't really get anywhere. You just got a bunch of random, you know, stuff.
Right.
And that's the thing I've been working on here lately, is really trying to focus what I want. And that's something that I really wish somebody would have told me kind of early on. But I agree with what you said, is that it's kind of the natural progression, and that's part of the fun.
Yeah. Yeah. I think like that discovery it's, I don't know if maybe growing pains is not the right way to describe it, but like, it's just like a part of like learning what the hobby is all about, is just, you know, going through the progression as you kind of laid it out. And then now, like, I think that there are ways, you know, and not strategies, because it's not like I'm thinking this hard about it, but like when I'm picking up new comic books, I'm thinking about like, okay, like here's what I really want to collect, and why I'm collecting this is because I really want to read it, and that's okay. And I'm just going to buy them, and that's a cost that I'm willing to, you know, do. And then sometimes like, it's like a series like, hey, I'm going to try this limited series and maybe I don't really like it and I'm reading it and it's like, okay, whatever. But you know what? I'm going to buy the rest of it so that if I'm done with it and I don't feel like, keeping it, I can sell the set to someone else who actually wants it. And that's a way to, recoup a little bit of the cost and things like that. So just I think little tools and tricks and things like that people can do in the collecting is just a good way and a good progression to have in the hobby.
No, I agree. All right, so let's go with question 5 here. And the name of this video was #1 tip for comic book investing. So that kind of ties into what we were talking about. And the way that I want to kind of frame this question is something that I've really been looking at and really kind of studying and really talking with my financial advisors and the people that I deal with on a daily basis on my investments. We've really been talking about comic books or trading cards or other things as a way to diversify my holdings, right? So kind of talk about your thoughts on, actual comic book investing and what you think as a long-term. Is it a good long-term strategy to create wealth?
I mean, I think it is I think comic book investing is a very fun part of your like investment portfolio, right? Like I'm sure there are people out there who really put a majority of their wealth into like comics as assets and stuff, and they're able to make a good living on it or make a good return. For me, it's like I personally wouldn't do it as far as like the majority of my portfolio because it's when you get into assets and stuff, it's like it can be risky in that sense. But I do think as a percentage of your wealth or your investments, I think that collectibles can be a great thing to put your money in. And so you mentioned the one video where I talked about like my #1 tip for comic investing. And really to me, like the nature of that video was because on my YouTube channel, and maybe you've gotten this too, is like, I'll have people who reach out to me on Instagram or maybe they'll leave a comment and they'll say like, hey, I'm thinking of buying this comic book. Do you think it's going to be a good investment? Or I had the chance to buy this comic book versus this comic book. Do you think that that's going to be a good investment? And to break down the video in a nutshell, what my point with my tip for investing was really, it's like, at the end of the day, it just comes down to like what your entry point into that particular thing is going to be, because comic books can be a great investment because all that you need to have a great investment is something that you can sell for more than what you bought it for. Right. So absolutely. One of the things that I talked about in that video specifically is it's like, well, yeah, like an AF-15 for Spider-Man can be a great investment. But if you have to buy, whatever the market price on eBay is right now to get your hands on it, maybe if you overpay for that, it's not going to be as good of an investment as you maybe are hoping it'll be, because your buy-in or your entry point into that book was a lot higher than what the fair market value should have been for it. So I know it's getting like kind of more technical in that sense, but like, really that was just me kind of talking about like, when you're thinking about investing in certain comic books, really it's about like, okay, mitigating your risk into the ones that you buy and trying to figure out like, okay, well, what are, the potential margins that you're going to have or the ROI you're going to have whenever you buy something. And it's less specifically, this is the comic book to buy. And it's more specifically, what is the price you have to pay and what's the potential for it to grow based on that price.
100%. And I agree with that completely. And that's one of the things that we've been kind of doing is I seem, because my investment guys know nothing about comic books, right? So I identified, just as a test case, like 10 books. I said, all right, these are 10 books. These are considered blue chips and in varying price ranges. And we have been tracking over time, like their sales history. There's all kinds of stuff out there where you can track that. And looking at the percentage return that we found on those particular books and how it compared to some other S&P, returns as well. And we have found that it tracks really just about the same as your average blue chip stock, and in some cases more. But the things that drive the market are a little harder to, it's not really harder to define. It's, which one comes next. Like the MCU drives a lot of this stuff, right?
Yeah.
So, and Disney Plus drives a lot of it. So you're trying to identify what could potentially come. And if you can buy cheap, then you can sell high, right? So that's kind of how we've been looking at it. And it's been an interesting case study, and these guys are kind of all into it now, right? Like they're like, okay, I had no idea that there was this kind of return on a comic book,
right,
over a period of time. And I said, yeah, but I picked 10 books that are considered blue chips, but have been driven by what's happened with Disney and Marvel, and who knows what that's going to be in the next 20 years.
Right. Yeah. And to your point, like comics are super fun as far as like to view them as investments, but there's more variables, like you said, like the MCU is really the thing that's moving it, or pop culture is moving it, even if it's like, even if it's, video games that are getting people excited, whatever the case is. So those variables, I guess, in a way, make it more risky. And it's a trickier market to navigate too, because, if you want to buy some Apple stock today, it's not too hard. You just go on to your, E-Trade or whatever it is, Robinhood, and you just buy some, whereas like if you want to get your hands on an AF-15, it's a little harder to figure out, okay, how am I going to get it? And is that the right price? So.
We have found it incredibly interesting. And it just makes me laugh to watch these guys as they kind of discover what the hobby really is. And they're like, comic books, you're a fool. That was what I got at first. So let's move on to question 6. And the title of this video was Market Manipulation. All right. Now, and I think you had a group on with you when you did this. And this is a topic I hear a lot about, that there are people in the community who are pushing a book to shove the value up, and then they can sell their copies. I don't know how much that really happens. I tend to believe that that's more, I won't call it conspiracy theory, but, I don't know how much that really happens. Right. I'm sure it happens in some cases, but the big, movers and shakers, they get caught doing that, then they're going to ruin all credibility, for what they do and the content they put out. So that's a pretty big price to pay to make a few bucks on a comic book. Yeah. So kind of give me your thoughts on market manipulation.
Yeah, I guess there's like different ways to kind of look at it, where it's like, we can look at it like kind of in a top level, like, does it happen? What does it mean? Like, is it a grand conspiracy, et cetera, et cetera? And then we can kind of look at it on a level that's like, like you and me, like if I found out tomorrow that Heritage Auctions is doing all these fake sales for AF-15 for, $3 million, whatever it is, like, does it really affect me, like just my day-to-day collecting? Probably not too much. So I think it really depends on like how we want to talk about it. Now, what you mentioned, where it's like, are there people who hype up books and then only with the, intent to flip them or to, to sell them or whatever? And it's like, there probably are, but like in any market, there's going to be those kind of, unscrupulous people, so it's not like anything different in comics or whatever. And to your point about like, it probably happens less than you think that it does. I think you're right about that. Cause let's say there's someone like me who makes a YouTube video, and it's like, okay, let's say I make a YouTube video that's like, here's 5 spec books to spec on. And then you happen to go to eBay and you notice Swagglehaus Comics as a seller, and he's got like 10 of those listed. Like for me to sell whatever and make that much money, and the trade-off is to ruin my reputation as like a YouTuber, is so not worth it. Like, I don't know, I'd have to make the deal of the century in order to, tank my comic book YouTube persona to do that. So I'm just not sure like at what level it happens at. And it probably doesn't happen as much as people might think that it does. But market manipulation can happen, and there might be some, things that we don't know that happen behind closed doors at these very, very big auction houses. And, these record sales and big sales can act as PR for comics or characters. So if like, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles sells for a record price, like oh, that gets everyone in the community thinking like, oh yeah, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles books. And then we start to think, that's a PR machine. So I think that there is probably that happens as well, but it happens in, fine art. It happens in, other, I guess, hobbies like watch collecting, or, I'm sure that there's, car enthusiasts that have some shady happening. So yeah, that's kind of
no, and I agree with what you're saying. Like, the juice has got to be worth the squeeze, right?
Yeah.
And I just don't think the juice is worth the squeeze for a lot of these big content creators who people think are, pushing books to drive the price up. I don't see that. What I do think happens, and I know this happened on eBay, and I cannot, for the life of me right now, I cannot think of the name of the company, but they were a huge eBay auction, PWCC or something like that.
That's right. Yeah.
And they essentially got caught with shill bidding, right? Like, yes, straw bidders, essentially driving the price up on things, on people, and got caught doing that. So it wasn't a true auction. It wasn't fair. I think things like that happen.
Yeah, I think you're right.
More than we believe.
I think the shill bidding is probably the one that happens the most as far as like the market manipulation type of thing, because it's probably the easiest thing to get away with anonymously. So that probably does happen, and that's where, the everyday collector, when you are chasing a hot book, or there's like, maybe you're bidding on something, that's where you have to be, really careful and make sure what price and what the fair market value for the thing is that you're trying to buy, and so that you don't get swept up into like a shill bid situation.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's the part that I see as much as anything. All right, and this kind of ties in. This will be question 7. And this kind of ties into what we've been talking about. And the title was Dirty Flippers. And,
yes,
and it kind of goes back to, because a lot of people in the community, it's one of the things I do see is a lot of people get mad because people are flipping books, right? But for me, it's as much about funding my hobby.
Yeah.
And, and if there's a market out there where somebody will pay more, then that's capitalism, right? That's the idea, is buy low, sell high, and be able to take that money and do it. So I don't necessarily agree that anybody that flips books are necessarily dirty flippers. So talk a little bit about that video and what it meant.
Yeah. And you set it up nicely. I mean, I think for the most part, in that particular video where, it was a kind of a discussion with some other people on there, and we were all kind of agreeing that, like, well, let's start here. I think the most idealized sense of what a flipper could be, or the most charitable definition of that, would be someone who, it's like, hey, look, they saw a comic out in the wild that they thought, hey, I think one day this might be a really valuable. And when that time came and that movie came, they sold, the copies that they had been stacking, and they cashed in on that equity. And then, maybe they used it to fund whatever else they wanted, or they kept it in their pocket. But like, that's okay. Like, I don't see anything wrong with that, because they were someone who just, they had a knowledge, or they leveraged their knowledge of the market in order to, presumably fund the hobby, or have it pay for something that they really wanted. And like you said, it's capitalism. I don't think there's anything necessarily wrong with that. The one thing that I think we didn't talk about in that video that I've since, like, I got a couple comments that were just trying to explain the other side of things, and I think it's maybe worth saying, is kind of what we were saying with the market manipulation thing, where it's like, are there people out there that kind of hype up certain comics in order to flip them onto, people through FOMO and things like that? And it's like, I guess, yes, there might be those people as well. And if we're classifying them as the flippers, then yeah, I mean, but in that situation, you're just sort of dealing with people who, are just, being kind of jerks about the situation. So I mean, sure, you can call them a dirty flipper or whatever the case is. And then I think maybe the third little thing about this is just, I guess there's also the negativity around, let's say there's a hot comic book coming out on New Comic Book Day, and someone goes into that store at like 10 a.m. right when doors open, and they take all of the books off the shelf and they buy them all, and then they go onto eBay because they know it's hot, and they flip it for like whatever, 3x or whatever. And Como Comic Books, who was on that panel, made a good point, and he just kind of mentioned, like, that's a particular situation where it feels like, I think LCSs have to kind of manage how they're going to work with their customers for certain hot books, and maybe they should have certain limited sales for an individual person.
No, I have a rule for myself for that, where like if I go in on New Comic Book Day and I know this book's hot, right?
Yeah.
I think the last one that I did this with that was, pretty successful, actually made some money, was that Batman Urban Legends #6. And I think it was Tim Drake came out as bisexual or gay.
Yeah.
But my rule is I go in on New Comic Book Day, I'll pick up my copy, maybe one or two.
Yeah.
And then I go back the next day. And if they're still sitting on the shelf, I will buy them all.
Totally. That's fine.
Yeah. And that way the true collectors, the true, enthusiasts of the hobby have their opportunity to purchase it on New Comic Book Day. And if they didn't get them all, then I'll go back the next day and I'll grab them.
Yeah.
And I was able to pay, $4 or $5 for whatever the cover was and sold them all for $30-$40 a piece, made a quick couple $100. So.
Yeah. And I think that's fine. I think in my area, the LCSs that I go to, like a lot of them have only one cover per customer, type of thing. So you can buy cover A and cover B and the 1 in 10 and all that stuff, but like you can't buy like 2 cover A's or 2 cover B's. Not every store has to do that. I actually think that that's probably a little too strict. I think you should be able to buy at least 2 personally, but I think, I think having some of those policies to kind of, keep it a little bit more fair, I think is fine. And hopefully there's just not too many of those situations where, like you said, like on day one, there's just that person who buys them all and then hoards them and stuff like that.
Right.
So,
yeah. No, and I can't do that. Like, in one sense, I'm like, I could do that, but no, I can't. I have to give everybody that because I don't want anybody to do that to me.
Yeah.
So,
what I think
that's
you
how
can
I look at it.
What I think you can do, and I think this is totally fair, and I'll say, is that, if you want to put in the effort to drive to different LCSs and buy one at each store, I actually think that there's nothing wrong with that either. I think if you're going to put your time in to do that and buy one at each store, I think that that's totally fine.
And that's why I can't be a hater, right? Because most people who are doing that, they've done some research. Mm-hmm. They put some time and effort in that I didn't, and they knew that this was going to be the book to get, right? So I can't hate on them too bad because there is some work that goes into that, having the knowledge of what's going to be a hot book.
Right. Exactly. So,
yeah. Okay. All right. Now let's talk about, this is really not kind of a video you've done on your channel, but I wanted to talk about spec because you do some spec videos or talk spec some on your channel. And when I was talking to Matt Forge and Debucha and Guy and some of the people who deal more in spec, stuff on their channels, I thought, and Matt gave me a really great answer to this. And I wanted to ask you, like, when you're looking at potential spec, like they'll look at books that come or shows that are coming out on the MCU, like Moon Knight. Well, Butch is a reader, right? So he goes back and gets the original Moon Knight trade or omnibus or whatever and reads it and then kind of identifies characters that potentially could show up in one of these shows. And then that's what they'll go look for and purchase, right? To maybe be able to buy something and sell it. Do you do anything similar to that as far as research?
Yeah, very much so. So like when I'm doing the spec, like ironically, like this is one of the things that I think I've made a video where I talked about spec and, I mentioned that like what ironically is really funny about it is that spec forces you to read a lot.
Yes.
So it's actually really fun. And so, yes, when I do my spec videos, I will think about like, certain storylines, like you said, like Moon Knight's coming out. Okay, well, what are the characters who are important to Moon Knight? Like who are his relatives? Like who are his villains? Who are his things like that? And I'll really start to, consume all those, whatever it is, like the Marvel Unlimited and stuff and look through all that stuff and do that research. And that will lead me, or I'll follow those breadcrumbs into the spec ideas. So that's actually kind of one of the fun parts about the speculation side of it is that, it actually does kind of force you to read a lot and consume like the actual history and the story of the characters.
Yeah, no, and like, when they were talking about that, I was like, you're right. You can kind of, because I don't deal with a whole lot of spec. Like I read and I study. There's some different things that I do, but I hadn't really got that deep, right? Like as far as really going back and reading these old books. And you're right. It is so much fun to go back and you get to read these stories you never necessarily read. I know when Hawkeye came out, I heard the defects talking about the Matt Fraction run of Hawkeye and how it was tied in. So I went back and read the Matt Fraction run, which was awesome. And I had never read that before. So I'm with you 100%. That is a whole lot of the fun of, kind of speculating on what's out there. And then hopefully you're right, right?
Yeah, yeah.
You're able to buy some stuff cheap and make a little money to maybe buy a grill.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's fun too, just to think about, what could be coming next and what characters. And I found myself like go down these, long Marvel wiki rabbit holes or other, like trades and things like that. And I've discovered characters or stories that I've actually really liked. And, it just zigzags every which way. So for me, I think some of the negativity of when you do content about spec is that, people will say like, well, do you even like comics or do you even read? And it's like, well, yeah, ultimately the irony is that I read quite a lot.
Yeah. You almost have to really to be able to, to actually kind of figure out. It's like a puzzle, right? It's like like a treasure hunt in a sense. You're just reading to do it. So that's, you brought that up. So, there is some negativity around spec, right? As far as that goes. And with the speculation market, I personally think that it is a big driver of the hobby. It creates interest. It creates, there's people who can make content on it. It gives you a different way to collect if you're kind of into the business aspect of it and want to buy low and sell high. Do you agree with that it really is a driver of the hobby? Probably one of the biggest drivers.
I think so. And I think for me, like the best way to think about it is it's like, in fandom, right? Like take the comic collecting aside. Let's just think about like the MCU stuff or the whatever. Like how many, YouTube videos are there about like predictions or rumors of things to come, or people get really excited about the post-credit scene and being like, oh, what does that mean? Like what's going to happen with Shang-Chi? Like, oh, the 10 rings and all this stuff. And so people are really excited about that stuff. And that fandom and conversation is some of the real fun part of like, what it is that we do with the hobby and stuff. So I think speculation in that sense is similar in terms of like the comic book collecting. It's just like a fun way to think about it, except it has that goal of like, okay, well, once we've made these conclusions of where we think we're going, hey, what comic book is related to that? And that's, that one step further that sort of comes with it. So yeah, I think it's a fun part of the hobby. And I think without that conversation and that sort of movement, to your original point, I think that those things are actually really necessary to keep the engagement of the hobby and stuff. So yeah, sorry, that's where I was going with the Marvel stuff. Is like when people are having these conversations, it's like we're all thinking about what's going to happen, or the movie people are all thinking about what's going to happen with Doctor Strange, the multiverse of madness coming off of Spider-Man, and it's like that's like a 6-month window that Marvel gets to have people just still engaged with the interest. So I think it's really important to have those discussions because that's what keeps the fandom sort of alive and top of mind.
Yeah, and it's totally off topic, but how sick was that Doctor Strange trailer?
Oh, so cool. So awesome.
Goodness.
Yeah. I'm super excited for that one.
Yeah, I mean, I think though it was amazing. Like I am pumped, and I'm not even that big of a Doctor Strange fan. Like as far as like, I don't really like the sorcery and that kind of thing doesn't really interest me. I'm not necessarily into that. But my goodness, I mean, I was like, oh my God, I can't wait to watch Doctor Strange.
Yeah.
So
it looks
cool.
it looks wild. I mean, and yeah, I think Sam Raimi has done awesome films. So I'm really excited to see like what that filmmaker brings to the table with them too.
And this is kind of off topic, but like, as somebody who does that type of work, do you critique stuff like that? Like when you see it, do you critique it just like can't help myself?
I do. I mean, on the one hand, I'm so forgiving because I know how difficult it is. And then on the other hand, I'm so critical because I know how I guess difficult it is. So to me, it's like on the, I really appreciate the superhero movies that are not just great, but like the craft is really well done. And the filmmaking is really well done. Like to me, it's like, it's just incredible. Some of the movies and like the execution of some of them. So I really appreciate those.
That's cool. All right. So kind of change gears a little bit. And I want to kind of come back and I like to ask this question of channels that have had some success and had growth, and your channel has clearly had that. And I wanted, if you don't care to, just kind of talk about some of the things that you believe have driven your success as far as subscriber count and watch hours, because I was kind of, I kind of go back and look as myself, somebody that's trying to grow a channel, and you look at other channels that have had success, right? What are they doing? And you look at how many people are watching their videos and things like that. And you've clearly had that success. So can you talk a little bit about what you believe has been the secret to that?
Sure. Yeah. I wish I really knew the answer. Because then I would like just take that and like repeat formula it even in my own videos. But I think one of the things, just consistency, I think is really important, because it's just, it's a snowball effect, I think, with YouTube, where it's like, if you put out videos regularly, like you'll have more regular people returning, and that sort of feeds itself as far as like getting the repeat views and having it be suggested to more people to watch, et cetera, et cetera. So I think the consistency is really, really important. And then, something for me that I always try to do is just make sure that I always think about like, how am I going to provide value to someone who's watching right now? Like they're going to spend their time, whatever, 10 to 15 minutes to watch this. And if I'm in their shoes, I want to feel like I used my time well, or I got something out of it in a way that was like helpful to me in my collecting. So, for me, it's like my YouTube is basically a comic book blog, right?
Sure.
Effectively, it's a blog. And from time to time, I'll just show off like, hey guys, here's some comic books that I bought, but to me, it's like, I always try to think like, instead of me just sort of showing, here's some comic books I bought, I think to myself like, okay, well, how am I going to provide value or added context or something to, people who watch it? So maybe I'll go into specifically like, hey, here's the new comic I got, but let me tell you about this aspect to what made me want to purchase this thing, or let me tell you about my thought process in why I decided to pay for it at this price range, or whatever it is. So I'm always just trying to think about that. And maybe that's the thing I think has, have people have appreciated, or I'm just trying to come from a place that's like, hey, like I'm a collector like you guys, and here's my thought process, and maybe this is going to help you guys as you watch it. So that inconsistency, I think, are the two.
That's great. No, and I love that thought process, is how do I provide value? Because that's one of the things, as my story of how I got into YouTube was I was trying to prove something to my kids, okay, that you can do anything you want to do. I'm an old man who likes comic books. I'm not that old, but, I'm a middle-aged man who likes comic books. I will show you that you can go on YouTube and I can get 1,000 subs.
Oh, wow. Okay?
And that's why I did it, because they were talking about it, and then they're like, oh, no, we can't do that. And I was like, yes, you can. Why? It just, like you said, takes a little bit of courage. You got to have that nerve, and then you got to put the work into it. That's just, that's the deal. And then it developed into something I love. Like it's a passion. Like I had no clue, but it developed into this passion for me. And I think that's great advice, because providing value, that at its core, that's what YouTube is. It's informational, like self-help videos and things like that, as far as how you fix a leak. Right. Stuff like that. So how do you provide value? And I love that answer. I think that's great and well explained. So, all right. So we're on question 10 of, or actually question 58, but this is actual question 10. And it was something you said earlier, and it just kind of struck me funny in a sense, but you said one of your favorite characters is Darkhawk. Now, the reason that strikes me kind of funny is because I like these random characters, okay? Like my favorite character of all time is Superman. There's just, as a kid, Clark Kent, I relate to Clark Kent, obviously not Superman. But like my favorite character outside of Superman is Firestorm.
And, that's funny, yeah.
Yeah, and and that's a Darkhawk-like character, right? That's a similar type character. Also Hawkman. I love Hawkman. And so I like these kind of random characters. So tell me what it is about Darkhawk that you love.
Well, I know why I like him, and it is circumstantial, right? Because like I mentioned, I got into comics 89, 90, 91, right? So that was like the first time I set into stores, and Darkhawk was a new character that came out in 91. So I think the first comic book I bought was a Spider-Man comic book. So when we went to the store, I bought whatever ASM was going on at the time. I can't remember exactly the number, but somewhere in that time period, I think when Mark Bagley was doing it, there was a storyline that incorporated like Punisher and Moon Knight and Darkhawk and Nova and like a bunch of these characters. And so this was my introduction into this character. And I think just character design wise, I was like, hey, this guy looks cool. Like I don't know anything about him, but hey, he just looks cool. And then that made me try to figure out, okay, well, who is Darkhawk? And then I picked up his #1 issue, and then I really got into that series, and that was like my kickoff into that character. But I think I just really appreciated like, you know, the character or the creation of the character it's a lot like Spider-Man. I mean, they took a lot of elements of like, here's a high school kid who was kind of like, unbeknownst to him, was sort of thrust in the situation where he got this very powerful amulet, and now he can like kind of turn himself into like an Iron Man, and he's just kind of figuring it out, navigating his like anonymity while going to high school. So they just took all the beats that really work with Peter Parker Spider-Man and just applied it to this new character. And for me, I just really enjoyed that, and I just fell in love with the character from that point on. And then, you know, years later, you know, he's kind of become a little bit of a meme in that sense, or he's kind of a joke character. And so now I'm kind of a proud Darkhawk fan, where it's like I get to sort of represent him in the community in sort of a kind of tongue-in-cheek kind of way. So you know, I just can't wait till the day that, you know, maybe we're going to see Darkhawk in the MCU and he'll actually be cool, and then I'll just be able to tell everyone that I told you so. You know, that's
I was a Darkhawk fan way back when, people.
Yeah.
No, and that's a very similar story of how I, you know, found Firestorm. It's really, you know, it was funny because, you know, here I live in Eastern Kentucky in the mountains, right in the hills. So we didn't have LCSs or comic book shops. You'd go to your supermarket, right? And I think Firestorm was the first book I ever really read. It was my uncle had it at the flea market, and I still have it today. It's in a safety deposit box. It's beat to death, but it was the very first comic book that I really held and really looked at. And then for whatever reason, at the local supermarket in the magazine rack, they would have Batman and Firestorm. And those orange and yellow colors just really stood out to me. The fact that he was like a physicist and the whole, I don't know, I just thought it was cool, you know? But you know, he just doesn't get the love he deserves. He's an awesome looking character, very similar to Darkhawk. I think he looks cool. And then Hawkman is he's just a man. He's just a beast, you know, an explorer, and the whole thing lives forever. I don't know. The whole thing just worked for me.
Yeah. I feel like it's a similar thing where it's like, I think, like, you know, we all have like a couple characters that we really love, or our favorite characters. And one of them is usually just the one that when you were at that impressionable start of your collecting career or whatever hobby, like, it's just, like you said, it was like the character is like, I don't know, I just saw this character and this is the one I just started reading. And so you have a special place in your heart for them. And then maybe as you get older and you really consume the stories, there's a certain character that resonates with you, you know, just because of what they stand for. And then there's, you know, other characters that maybe because they're in the MCU or whatever, you just like them after that. So yeah, we just kind of have our favorites, and sometimes they're just the ones that were, you know, right place, right time.
I love it, man. All right, Mickey, that's been 10 questions, brother. That's it. That was a blast. I hope you really enjoyed that, because I had a good time.
Yeah, and thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So guys, I will link Swagglehaus's info down in the description below. If you're not following him, go check him out, because I found his channel. It was suggested to me. I found it and really started watching some of the content and love it. And I think you see tonight or through this interview why the channel has had the success it's had. You know, and from the informational aspect and providing value to this community. I don't think you're going to find a better channel for that. So yeah, Mickey, thank you so much, man. Again, I really appreciate it. Guys, this has been 10 Questions.
Thank you so much, Jimmy.
You're welcome, man. See you later.